Welcome. My name is Greg Kruger with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'd like to thank my co-authors, Dr. Charles Wortman, Evan Sonderegger, and Dr. Charles Shapiro for help in this particular piece. Today, I'm going to talk about searching for the holy grail of soybean production, growing 100 bushel soybeans. In order to get 100 bushel soybeans, it's important that we put the right practices together with the right environmental conditions. To do this is very difficult because without a crystal ball, we never know exactly what's going to come along. But it's important to at least try to set ourselves up to maximize our production in conditions that are typical for our area. In order to get 100 bushel soybeans, everything is going to have to be exactly right. The question then becomes, is it physiologically feasible to get 100 bushel soybeans from a field? After the 2010 national soybean yield record being broken in Missouri, there was much interest by producers in looking at alternative practices that were reported from the high-yielding soybean plots that were in Missouri. In 2011, UNL researchers and extension specialists got together to discuss the development of research protocols to address questions surrounding some of these alternative practices. So first, the question was, what is feasible? Based on solar radiation input and likely theoretical maximum soybean yields of 120 bushel per acre, it seemed feasible that we could hit 100 bushel soybeans. However, Nebraska state yield records were discontinued in 2000, so we really don't have a good, deep, rich history of understanding how maximum soybean productions have gone about the last few years. There have been reports of yields between 90 and 100 bushels per acre over 2010 and 2011, but really we don't have a strong record of what soybean yields are across the state. While we were talking about soybeans, I thought it was important to bring in the corn. The National Corn Growers Yield Contest reports can be seen in the table below with the grain yields. You can see between 1987 and 2011, we've had an increasing corn yield for each year, with some fluctuation based on environmental conditions within each year, but a trend upwards. The record for Nebraska is approximately 332 bushel of corn per year. With soybeans, we see approximately a third of that yield, as we see in corn, and as you can see, that would suggest that somewhere around 100 or just over 100 bushels seems like the most likely maximum for soybean yield production in Nebraska. Now, the high-yield trials conducted at the Soybean Management Field Day sites in 2011 will be discussed in the following slides. Those studies were really set up as a protocol to address some of the practices we believe will increase or could potentially increase soybean yields. Some of these practices include tillage, early planting, choosing the correct maturity group for the location, row spacing, seeding rate, seed dressings of using different seed-applied treatments, fungicide applications, irrigation applications, and nutrient applications, particularly looking at nitrogen and manure. The picture below, taken from 2004, depicts the importance of planting date. This picture is provided courtesy of Jim Specht, where he had taken pictures showing planting dates between April 28th on the left and June 17th on the right. This particular picture shows the importance of planting by May 1st to maximize yields, and it's really what the data from this study and other studies conducted throughout the state would suggest, that the earlier we plant, the greater the yield potential will be. On this particular slide, we're talking about one of the treatments that we introduced into the study, that being clipping, or the use of Cobra, a PPO inhibitor, commonly known as lactofen, which we applied at 12 ounces per acre, just below the labeled rate of 12.5 ounces per acre, at the V2 stage. The purpose of using Cobra or clipping for this particular study was to break apical dominance. The thought behind this being that if we can break apical dominance, increase the branching on the plants, that the plants would be able to hold more pods and greater yields without lodging. Now, this is not a new idea. However, using Cobra in this fashion or other products to try to induce branching is a little bit of a new twist. Soybean plants produce in excess the number of flowers and pods, and throughout the remainder of the growing season will abort those pods, potentially reducing the maximum potential yields. By adding branches, we can increase the number of pods that the plant is able to hold. Theoretically, we may be able to increase yields. Two other things that we looked at in this particular study were the applications of BioForge and Optimize. BioForge was a seed treatment applied at 4 ounces per 100 pounds and is a non-regulated growth promoter used for the increased stress tolerance. Optimize 400 is an elite Bradyrhizobium japonicum inoculant. This particular product is used to help increase the number of rhizobia that we see on the root system and hopefully increase the amount of nitrogen available for the plant. Now, the remaining treatments that we looked at were 5 pounds of starter nitrogen in the furrow, as well as a foliar nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium application that included micronutrients at the R2 stage. Our treatment configuration consisted of a -1 or an emission trial, where we used all of the above treatments that we've discussed as a full package, and then each of the following treatments we subtracted one of those from the treatment list. We also included a complete non-treatment treatment in order to allow us to look at what we would have yielded without any of the above applications. On this slide you can see the full layout of the study. The red boxes indicate treatments where we used the particular practice in the column. So for example, number 1, the full treatment, we included 5 pounds of starter nitrogen in the seed furrow, the foliar nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, plus micronutrients at the R2 stage, the BioForge seed treatment, the optimized 400 seed treatment, and the clipping at the V2 stage. Treatment number 2 was exactly the same, with the substitution of Cobra at 12.5 ounces at the V2 stage instead of clipping of the plants. Treatments 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are omission treatments where we omitted one of the following practices, where the white box appears. For example, treatment 3 was minus the starter nitrogen, so we didn't add the 5 pounds of starter nitrogen in the seed furrow, so on and so forth. Treatment 8 is our control, where we had none of the above treatments to try to increase the soybean yields over the standard production practices in that particular field. The table to the right shows us the yield across all 4 of the soybean management field day sites last year, and across all 4 replications at each site. What we see is that the yields were significantly lower for the full package with Cobra, the full package with starter nitrogen, the full package without the foliar treatment, full package without the BioForge, the full package without the optimized 400. Across all 4 locations, we averaged between 58 and 61 bushels for each of those treatments. Now, the full package minus the clipping, we had 65.6 bushels, and the minus all, we had 65.7 bushels. This indicates that the clipping, or the breaking of the apical meristem to induce branching, significantly affected the yield and development of the plant. All other treatments really didn't seem to have much impact on the yields when we combine across all 4 locations. Briefly, I want to bring to your attention the studies that we've started in the 2012 soybean management field day sites to further investigate a few of the production practices which we didn't have time to address last year. In the first study, we've got a plant population study where we're looking at 100, 150, and 200,000 seeds per acre for each of 3 different maturity groups in an attempt to understand how we can maximize yields based on population and maturity group. So we used 3 different maturity groups reflective of the range of different maturity groups grown in Nebraska. We had a 2.4, which would be a very short season soybean in Nebraska, a 2.9, and a 3.4, which would be a longer season maturity group for Nebraska. On top of this, at both North Platte and David City, we've added the same study with the addition of 50,000 and 250,000 seeds per acre. In study number 2, we have a plant population by row spacing study, where we're looking at 100, 150, and 200,000 seeds per acre in combination with 15 and 30-inch rows in an attempt to understand what the ideal seeding population and row spacing is to maximize yield production in Nebraska. With that, I'd like to say thank you both to you for taking your time to look at the data that we have from the 2011 soybean management field day sites, as well as what we're attempting to address in the 2012 soybean management field day locations. Thank you to the Nebraska Soybean Board for their support in this research.